Good morning. On behalf of all of us here at the Cooper Institute, we welcome you to our Coffee with Cooper virtual series that focuses on taking control of your health and working towards a healthier future. The series presents up-to-date health and wellness information and offers suggestions for healthier living based on proven science. I'm Dr. Angelika Pavlovich, Director of Research and Education at the Cooper Institute. For those who are not familiar with the Cooper Institute, Dr. Kenneth H. Cooper established the Cooper Institute nonprofit in 1970 to promote lifelong health and wellness worldwide through research, education, and advocacy. By improving public health, the Cooper Institute helps people lead better, longer lives now and well into the future. It's my pleasure today to welcome Dr. Waziha Samin, who is an optometrist specializing in ocular disease at Cooper Clinic. She received a Bachelor of Science in Public Health from the University of Texas at Austin and a Doctor of Optometry from the University of Houston College of Optometry, and completed her residency in ocular disease at Cedar Springs Eye Clinic in Dallas. After completing her residency, Dr. Samin provided optometric services such as routine eye care, contact lens fitting, geriatric eye care, peri-surgical management, and ocular disease management at a variety of vision centers across Dallas-Fort Worth, and completed an ocular disease fellowship with the American Academy of Optometry. Dr. Samin is a member of the American Optometric Association, Texas Optometric Association, and Dallas County Optometric Society. Today, Dr. Samin is discussing the importance of eye health and how to protect your vision. We'll have a few minutes at the end for her to answer questions you have submitted in advance. You can also use the Q&A function in Zoom, where we'll get to as many questions as possible. Dr. Samin, welcome.
Thank you, Angelica. That was a very nice introduction. So good morning, everyone. I'm very excited to be here. I am one of the newest members at the Cooper Clinic, and apparently you guys all wanted eye care, so I'm very excited to bring that today. So this morning I kind of wanted to talk about, kind of a general gist of eye care and what you kind of need to know as far as what are we even looking at when it comes to like an eye exam, and why is eye health important, and some of kind of the simple steps that we can take that make a big impact as far as preserving our eye health goes. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's see here. Oh, thank you. So first of all, why is eye health even important? So, I think most sighted individuals know how important our vision is to our day-to-day lives. But, sometimes we don't realize exactly how important, but 80% of some of our sensory impressions are actually perceived by the means of sight. So our eyes can actually process about 10 million pieces of information per second. And to do that, our brain actually devotes about a third of its tissue to process that sight. There was actually one study that kind of looked at, out of the basic senses of sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell, which of these senses tend to be the most important. And this study found that within English-speaking cultures, sight actually ranked to be the highest. And the way they did that was they had individuals describe objects using, what does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it touch? How does it feel? And English-speaking cultured patients basically were able to describe objects the most easily by visual words and adjectives. So that kind of shows us exactly how dependent we are on our vision and our ability to process what we're seeing. Now, does clear vision mean that our eyes are technically healthy, or does that mean that we don't really need to get our eyes examined or anything? Well, first of all, a lot of people don't even realize that they could be seeing better. We tend to normalize blurriness in our vision and kind of ignore when things are blurry or when we have to squint. So, like, for example, driving is a big one because it's such a visually dependent task. But a lot of people don't realize that when we go get our driver's license renewed at the DMV, they only require our vision to be 20/40 or better just in one eye. So 20/20 is what we want, what we consider to be perfect vision. 20/40 is actually 2 lines away from that. And we only need it in one of our eyes. So if the other eye is even poorer than that, you'll still pass. So needing to squint throughout the day or feeling like you can't drive normally at night isn't actually normal per se, but we've kind of normalized it as a society and we ignore it. I'll have patients stop driving at night because they think that it just naturally becomes harder to drive at night and this is normal and that's something older individuals shouldn't be driving anymore, which is not the case. A lot of the time there are very correctable vision issues that prevent us from driving at night that we're ignoring because we just haven't necessarily put a lot of thought into it. So going back to if clear vision means that our eyes are healthy or not, technically, no, it doesn't always mean that our eyes are healthy just because we can see. Many eye diseases affect our eye health before it affects the actual quality of our vision. Diseases such as glaucoma and macular degeneration, often in its early stages, affect the tissues of our eyes before we even realize it's impacting our vision. We go about day to day living with these conditions without, it having changed how we see things. It's almost until it's not until it's too late that we realize, oh my gosh, there's something wrong. But by then, sometimes the vision loss is irreversible. So that's why early detection of some of these eye diseases is key when it comes to treatment. I will tell all of my patients when it comes to eye diseases and eye conditions, prevention is a lot easier than treatment for sure. So let's talk about some of the structures of the eye, first of all, because a lot of people don't realize how complicated such a small structure can be. So we have structures on the outside of our eye, like the muscles, the lid, the lashes, the colored part of our eye known as the iris, the conjunctiva and the sclera, which are the whites of our eyes. There's the cornea as well, which is the clear tissue on top of the colored part of our eye, and our pupil, which is the center of the colored part of our eye, which is essentially a hole that allows light to go from the outside in and be processed by the retina. So our internal structures are the ones that most people can't see and don't even know exist. So there is a lens on the inside of the eye that we don't even know exists sometimes. And this lens is what we use to focus at far distances and then up close. And that is actually the structure that can stiffen over time and be the cause for why we need readers. And I'll go into that in a little bit. But there's also the gel body of our eye known as the vitreous humor, the retina, which is the light processing tissue of the back of the eye, the macula, which is the center of the retina, which does a lot of the fine detail processing. And then there's also the optic nerve, which takes all of that information from our eyeball and transmits it to our brain. And then the choroid is the very back structure that provides a lot of nutrients to the retina. So first, let's start off by talking about some of the natural conditions of aging. So these are conditions that I like to joke about, but I usually tell patients it's like gray hairs. If you live long enough, you'll eventually get these. And if you don't tell anybody because they might hate you a little bit. So the first condition is called presbyopia. This is the condition where we start noticing that our ability to focus up close is no longer what it used to be. So this usually occurs in our 40s. Most patients will enter their 40s and start noticing that their ability to focus up close is a little hindered. Sometimes what it feels like is just there's like a slower lag time between focusing far away and then trying to read something. And then as we get deeper into our 40s, we start noticing that we kind of have to push some of the text that we could normally read further and further back. Our arms become shorter, as the joke goes. Now, patients who are nearsighted, meaning they have sight for near, these are the patients that typically had trouble seeing far away, but then they got glasses or contacts to help them see up close. These patients can sometimes use that natural nearsightedness initially to help them see up close, but then when they correct that nearsightedness with their glasses or contacts, they realize, man, I can't see up close either. What happened to that? So this is a very correctable issue. Sometimes it just needs additional correction within our glasses and contacts. Light is also something that can help with this. Floaters. So, sometimes you'll see a little tiny dot or a little speck kind of float throughout your vision. It might look a little opaque. And some patients will say, oh, I thought I saw a little gnat in my vision, but it wasn't there. And these floaters are actually little microscopic collagen fibers within the gel body of our eye. They cast shadows on our retina, which we perceive to be floaters. We'll notice them more on brighter days or up against like a white background. And they're kind of intermittent. They'll kind of go, you will see them more when we're very active, but then when we're kind of sedentary, they'll settle back down. We won't notice them as much. Now, while floaters are very typical and majority are benign, unusual floaters or a change in floaters can often indicate changes within the retina that definitely warrant closer attention, like retinal holes or tears. So, if you start to notice a change in your floaters that's very noticeable, they're becoming more apparent, there's larger ones, or there's a lot more of them, it may warrant an eye exam to make sure that your retinal health is intact. Next, let's talk about cataracts. So cataracts are when the lens on the inside of the eye becomes cloudy with age. The lens's purpose is to filter UV light so that it doesn't damage the retina. And it does that throughout its entire life. But by the time we start hitting our 60s, it's done that so often that the structures on the inside of the lens actually change to where it's not as clear anymore. It's actually a little bit more cloudy. So as it becomes more cloudy, light will enter the eye, it'll spread. And instead of us seeing images that are nice and crisp, sometimes we'll notice a lack of detail or notice glare. And that's when patients will start to report kind of a fog on their lens or difficulty, especially driving at night. So this is a condition that is very easily correctable with surgery, and surgery has come a long ways. So while cataracts sound like they can be very scary or something that most people are afraid of because they're worried that they have to get surgery, because the surgery itself has come a long ways and it's a lot more routine now, patients can get a lot more visual freedom once they've actually gotten their surgery done. And if you're somebody who gets their eyes examined regularly, often your doctor will tell you about your cataracts before they even start to impact your vision. I'm one of those people who likes to know what's going on before it happens. So that way, and I like to manage expectations so that things aren't scary when it happens. So getting that information from your doctor can be very helpful. And a lot of the times your doctor will kind of guide you as well, whether it's time for surgery or not. So now that we've talked about some of the more natural conditions of aging, let's talk about some of the diseases that can develop. Now, I'm going to go over some of the more common conditions or some of the more major ones. This is, by no means does it cover everything that can happen. So first, let's start off with one of the more common conditions, which is dry eye disease. So dry eye disease is something that can cause a lot of symptoms. Our eyes can be dry because we're either not producing enough tears, or the tears that we're producing are not great as far as their quality goes. Our tears are meant to hydrate and lubricate the surface of our eye, and they're also meant to keep the surface of our eye lubricated. But sometimes when some of the cells of our eye or some of the glands aren't producing their components, like some of the oils that are part of our tears, we may be producing enough tears, but those tears will evaporate very quickly and we find ourselves symptomatic. Now, as you can see, there's a lot of symptoms that can occur, like itchiness, sensitivity to the light, feeling like you have to blink all the time, or even feeling like there's something floating around in your eyes. I will get several patients who will come in and they'll tell me that they feel like there's constantly something in their eyes kind of rolling around, and they'll have me check up and down to make sure that there's no foreign object in there. But what it is, it's their dryness. Their dryness will cause them to feel like there's something in it. Now, dryness doesn't necessarily occur in older adults. It can actually occur in our teenage years, in our 20s and our 30s, but it's typically a condition that can get worse as we age, because all of the components that are required to produce good quality tears, sometimes they start to lag a little bit. And dry eye disease is also something that's kind of unique to each individual. Not everyone's dryness is the same, and that also means that not everyone's treatment will be the same as well, which is why getting your eye dryness evaluated is so important, because even though artificial tears work for a friend of yours, you might be somebody who needs warm compresses or supplementation with omega-3s for your gland health. So that's one condition. Let's move on to the next. Glaucoma is kind of a word that gets thrown out a lot, and most patients will hear the word and they'll know that it's a condition that can be scary and they automatically think blindness, but a lot of people don't have an understanding of what it is. But in general, what it is a condition that causes the tissue of the optic nerve to progressively thin out over time. And as that tissue starts to thin out, we start to lose some of our peripheral vision. As you can see in my comic there, when we have all of our vision, we can see kind of the fire off to the side in our periphery. But as we start to lose that peripheral vision, we lose a lot of details that are necessary. Now, when patients think glaucoma, immediately they think, oh, it's that air puff test. It's my eye pressures. If my eye pressures are fine, I don't have glaucoma, which is definitely not the case. Eye pressures are just one component of glaucoma that we evaluate, but the other components are the health of the optic nerve tissue itself, whether we have an adequate amount, and our peripheral vision. So a glaucoma evaluation will look at your eye pressures. It'll calculate how much tissue you have within your optic nerve, and it'll evaluate your peripheral vision, because even in early stages of glaucoma, while you may not notice that you're even losing your peripheral vision, when we test that peripheral vision, we'll notice that we're actually starting to lose some of the sensitivity of our vision off to the side. We may not perceive light as well as we should in our periphery. So that's one condition. Now let's talk about a condition that can affect our central vision. Macular degeneration affects the center of the retina, known as the macula, causing a loss of central vision. This is usually caused by oxidative stress to the macular tissue. The macula is processing fine details throughout the day. It is a very metabolically active tissue that requires a lot of energy, a lot of blood supply, a lot of oxygen. And oxidative damage occurs when we have free radicals that float around and can damage some of the cells known as the pigmented cells, the retinal pigmentary epithelium. So what happens is we start to accumulate these waste deposits within that tissue that can interrupt how those tissues function, leading to a loss of central vision. So in early stages of macular degeneration, we may not notice that there's anything wrong with our central vision per se. There may not be like splotches of vision that are missing, but what we start to notice is trouble adapting to light. So going from a very brightly lit room to a darker room, or vice versa, can feel like it takes a really long time for our eyes to adjust. And that can often be an early symptom. But what I've noticed in majority of my patients is when they're at an early stage of macular degeneration, often they're very unaware. And then things can take a turn quickly, especially for my patients who are smokers, because then, we start noticing that light adaptation issue. Then we start noticing, man, I'm not seeing as well as I used to out of my glasses. And even my newest pair of glasses, it's just, the vision's just not what it used to be. And then finally, what can happen in later, more advanced stages of glaucoma, we can actually start getting fluid leakage in the back of the eye. And this is what we call wet macular degeneration. And when fluid starts to leak in the back of our eye, that can really distort the tissue and distort how well we can see centrally. Some of the vision loss from macular degeneration can be very devastating because it's so central. It affects how we can perceive people's faces, which is very important because us as humans, we're such social creatures. So the next condition that I want to talk about are ocular strokes. So just like how we can get strokes within the brain known as cerebral strokes, we can get strokes within the eye themselves, the eyes itself. So a stroke is essentially when there's a blockage in the blood vessels that prevents blood and oxygen from getting to the tissues that it needs to go to. So if you can see my image here, this is a stroke that occurs when a vein gets blocked. The veins are the purpose of the veins are to carry blood away from the retina back to its circulation. And when we get a blockage within the vein, it causes the blood to get backed up. And when we have blood backed up within that tissue, the retina will become distorted, and so will our image, and so will our vision. So these sort of strokes sometimes can resolve on their own without any lasting damage, but some damage can also be permanent. Now, the bottom image, as you can see, kind of where the whitish spot is in the retina, that is an artery occlusion. So that part of the retina is where we had a blockage and the blood actually could not go and deliver the nutrients needed to that part of the retinal tissue. And so it'll cause a whitening of that tissue, and that will actually lead to a greater degree of vision loss. So a lot of the times what can happen is we can even detect some of these blockages before they even impact your vision and cause a stroke. And my next slide will cover that. So these are examples of some common vessel blockages that we can find. On the left is what we call a Hollenhorst plaque. These are plaques that can actually develop more so in our carotid arteries and our aorta. And these are often made of cholesterol. And what can happen is parts of these plaques can detach and flow through the blood vessels and eventually kind of get stuck within some of the finer vessels. And once it's stuck, it forms an embolism, which means that the blood cannot get past that blockage and it won't be able to travel to the tissue that it needs to. So not only can it cause a stroke to the eye itself, but it can also indicate that there's something wrong with our carotid arteries or our aorta. So when I see a Hollenhorst plaque, one of the main things that I recommend is a full cardiovascular workup to make sure that we don't have blockages elsewhere. You think it's such a small finding, but it can mean something so impactful. I've had patients avoid a stroke because we were able to detect a plaque within their carotid. And, I've had patients come back and say, I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't gotten my eye exam, which, you don't think is something that happens a lot, but it does. Now, when we get Hollenhorst plaques within our retina, sometimes they can dissolve on their own and pass along. Otherwise, it's kind of a waiting game. But, strategies to improve our cardiovascular health can also prevent these from causing damage to our eyes. Now, the image on the left is what we call arteriovenous nicking. This happens a lot in our patients who have high blood pressure or hypertension. What high blood pressure and hypertension do to the blood vessels is it makes the walls more rigid, especially within our arteries. And when those vessel walls become rigid, they start putting pressure on one another. And once they do that, it's like stepping on a garden hose. You step on a garden hose, that prevents the water from coming out and it gets backed up. So often what will happen is if a vein is being blocked by an artery because it's being compressed, it can cause that blood, instead of flowing through naturally, to get backed up within the retinal tissue and essentially distort the retinal tissue. Next are ocular melanomas. So ocular melanomas are basically cancerous growths that can occur within the pigmented tissues of the eye. And the eye has a lot of pigmented tissues: our iris, our retina, our choroid. Now, the retina technically doesn't have pigmentation, but the choroid, which feeds into the retina, does. And these melanomas will basically happen when there's a mutation within these pigmented cells. And so, as you can see, these are retinal images. These are OptiMap images that give us a photo of the retina, and we can see these growths here. Now, these growths you wouldn't be able to detect otherwise without having an eye exam, because there are no pain receptors in the back of the eye. I joke around with patients, but it's true. There are no pain receptors in the back of the eye. So your eye could be on fire back there and you wouldn't know, because there's nothing to convey that damage. So, and we're very sensory dependent in that sense. You know, sometimes we don't go to the eye doctor or any other doctor until we have pain or something that's, you know, tangible, that something's not feeling right. So, you know, getting that dilated exam is important because you can have something this major that can be missed off just because it, you know, we failed to catch it. We can also get melanomas on the iris. So, you know, patients who have a brown spot on the colored part of their eye, while some think, oh, okay, this is just a trait of mine. It's something that we definitely need to watch, especially for those individuals who have lightly colored irises or who have a lot of sun exposure, because those pigmented spots can often convert into melanomas. The reason melanomas are also very important is because they don't often just stay within the eye. They can metastasize and go to other parts of the body, which then becomes very difficult to manage. So with melanomas, again, early detection is key. I usually send patients to a retinal specialist who will specialize in ocular melanomas and have that melanoma training. And there are different options available for treatment, like cryotherapy. Sometimes lasers can be used for destruction. But, you know, in some unfortunate cases, I've even had patients have to have that eye removed because the risk of metastasis or spreading to the other tissues was so high. Scary, but again, early detection can make the biggest difference. Now let's talk about some other retinal changes that can occur. These aren't necessarily, you know, chronic diseases or anything, but changes that can occur to that retinal tissue that can distort our vision or cause other issues. So these retinal changes can distort our vision depending on where the change is occurring and the type of change that's occurring. So the first example is what's known as an epiretinal membrane. So just like how our skin can get wrinkles on the outside, we can actually get wrinkling of the tissue of the retina as well. Epiretinal membranes are basically membranes that can occur on top of the retinal tissue and contract, causing the tissue to start to wrinkle. So right here is what a typical macula looks like. It looks like two hills that meet at a valley. This string right here is the membrane that can develop on top of the macula. And as you can see, it's pulling up on that tissue and it's causing these little wrinkles. So another name for epiretinal membranes are cellophane maculopathy. So if you can imagine a piece of plastic wrap, you know, if you've got a nice straight piece of plastic wrap, you should be able to see right through it. So that would be a membrane that's not necessarily contracting or distorting your tissue. You know, it's just one that's there. But the one in this image here is one that would be like a crumpled up piece of plastic wrap. Imagine crumpling up a piece of plastic wrap and then reopening it. So while you would be able to see through it, the image would be distorted. And that's what an epiretinal membrane can do. Now, these membranes can be removed, but the timing of it is kind of crucial. Some of the more mild ones will leave alone since they're not impacting your vision and they're not likely to progress. But some of the more significant ones, like the one in this image here, can be removed with retinal surgery to improve our vision again. Now, the other three examples, retinal holes, tears, and detachments, are actually kind of tied to one another. So the retina is a tissue that stretches along the back of our eye, and there can be spots within the retina that are a little thin. And if you can imagine stretching a tissue so thin that it develops a hole or a tear, you know, the retina can do the same thing. So once we have a hole or a tear develop within the retina, it becomes dangerous because the fluid from the gel body of our eye can go through that hole or that tear and create fluid space that causes the retina to detach. And because the retina is the equivalent to like the film of a camera, you know, if you can imagine a distortion within the film, that's what it can do to your vision as well. If you've got a distorted film, your camera is not going to take good images or process it well. The retina is the same way. If you've got a detached retina, you know, you're going to miss out on a lot of your vision. And depending on the degree of the detachment, we can often have complete vision loss, or permanent vision loss, that takes up a very significant portion of our vision. So now, how do we know these are even occurring? Sometimes an eye exam will detect these things before we even know that we have them. B, there are certain symptoms that we definitely need to be aware of. Again, going back to those unusual floaters, if you ever start getting floaters in your eyes that are kind of glob-like or very large, or there's a whole bunch that you're seeing now, that would warrant an evaluation to take a look at that retina. Flashes of light are a big one. Anyone that starts seeing flashes of light in their vision and they know it's not really in their environment, that's something that we don't want to ignore, because when that retinal tissue will start to distort, sometimes we'll see a flash of light that can often be a first indicator of something wrong. Curtains or veils in your vision are also big ones, because that can indicate that the retina is actually detaching. So whenever someone experiences those symptoms, it is very, very key that we get the attention immediately. So I tell patients, if you get those symptoms, stop what you're doing, and find the nearest eye doctor. Even if it's not your regular eye doctor that you see, find someone who's open, have somebody look at it. Urgent cares and ERs, when all else fails, go to an ER, because sometimes they'll have an ophthalmologist on staff, and urgent care is likely not going to have it. And the problem with urgent cares is you may have a doctor who won't really know what's going on, may send you home, or may not realize how important this is and tell you to go see your eye doctor a week from now when you need to be seen, the next morning. So the best thing to do if you start getting these symptoms is reach out to your eye doctor or an optometrist or an ophthalmologist, let them know your symptoms. And if you have no access to one, reach out to an ER or a hospital. It is very, very crucial. And I understand that things can happen in the middle of the night. So, even if this requires you to call first thing in the morning, very, very important that you do that and not ignore those symptoms. Now, we talked about ocular strokes a little bit. Now let's talk about how strokes within the brain can actually impact our vision. So we actually have nerves that go from our eye and they travel through the entire brain to the visual cortex that goes into the very back. Now our optic nerve fibers, because they course the entire brain, you can have a stroke to different parts of the brain and have it still impact your vision, even though the stroke isn't necessarily in your visual cortex. So strokes often occur and cause a loss of peripheral vision depending on where the stroke happens. And the sad thing about strokes is, depending on how long that tissue didn't receive oxygen, some of the vision loss can be permanent. What's interesting about stroke damage is, because our brains have a very unique way of compensating for our vision, I will often have patients who don't even realize that they've had a stroke until we've done a side vision test, because something felt off, or on our rudimentary check of their side vision, we notice that they're not picking up details off to one side of their vision. And we look at their health and we realize, oh, well, this person actually has cardiovascular issues. So when we do a fine assessment of their peripheral vision, we'll often see that there's loss to one side in each eye. So for example, this right here, you see an image of people at a park and you might see one side of it. So you think that this is the extent of your vision. But often what can happen for post-stroke patients is, what we start to do is we develop what's known as visual neglect. We start to neglect the image that's supposed to be on the other side. So an example of that could be, someone can look at their plate while they're eating dinner and only eat the food that's on one side of the plate and not realize that there's even food on the other side, and we normalize it. So again, because having one stroke, even though the damage has already been done, it's still important to get that evaluated, because that could still mean that we're at risk for developing a stroke again or having even further damage. Now, how can I protect my eyes? Now that you've learned all the scary stuff that can happen, how can we go about protecting our eyes from what can happen to us? First and foremost, have your annual eye exam. So a lot of people don't realize all the things that we're testing when we're testing our eyes during an eye exam. So, most people think it's just the which is better, one or two, get your glasses and then you're out of there. But we're not only are we checking visual acuity, which is how well you can see, we're checking we're checking your prescription. We're also checking that peripheral vision to see if there's any gross neglect or any signs that we have any gross loss of visual field. We're also checking your binocular vision, meaning we're checking to see how well your eyes work together to make sure that you have good depth perception. We're also looking at all of those structures that I went over previously to make sure those structures look healthy. We're also evaluating any presence of eye disease, which can also indicate the presence of systemic diseases like we were talking about with those plaques. Now, let me tell you a little bit about what I'm doing at the Cooper Clinic. So the Cooper Clinic comprehensive eye exam is a little different from what we used to have in the past. Before, we had a screening that could, detect people who really had vision issues that needed to be addressed. And also, if we had high eye pressures or a gross loss of peripheral vision. But now we're doing a full comprehensive exam. So along with the visual evaluation, that'll include a prescription. I'm actually going to be looking at your ocular tissues to make sure that they look the way that they're supposed to. We also do what's known as wide field retinal imaging, which is this image right here. So this is actually an image of the back of the eye, so the retina, looking at the blood vessels, the optic nerve, and the macula, which is in the very center. Now, what's very unique about the OptiMap retinal imaging is we get this amazing view of the retina without the dilation. Now, that's not to say that we're not dilating at all, but, when we have such good image in the absence of other symptoms and, when we've gotten a good image that gives me a good view edge to edge of the retina, often we can do without the dilation. But there are times where I will dilate the eyes, particularly if I notice something wrong with the retina that requires a little bit more in-depth of a look. So while the image is great, it is two-dimensional. I'm not able to perceive depth. So in those cases, I may dilate a patient to see, okay, is that retina showing signs of detachment? Because often we'll see some elevation there. Or, sometimes I'll have patients who have eyes that don't open super duper wide because they're a little light sensitive, so I might not get a great image. And in those cases, especially if I suspect that there might be damage from diabetes or any other retinal issues, I might go ahead and dilate the eye so that I can take a look as well. So while the image is great, it doesn't replace the dilation, but man, does it give me a very good record of what's going on. And what's great about these images as well is we actually attach them to your record so that we can evaluate how you're changing over time. So an abnormality that I might detect one year, I can go back to previous years to see if that was there before, or see if this is something that's rapidly changing. Now, there's also something known as the Eye Health Plus exam. And this is an exam that we do for individuals above the age of 50. So once we enter our 50s, our risk for developing eye disease just goes up significantly. So we actually do additional imaging to screen for certain conditions like glaucoma, macular degeneration, and diabetic retinopathy. So while the Eye Health Plus exam is definitely recommended for those above 50, I also want all of my diabetics, regardless of what age, to get this screening done because it will help me find any evidence of diabetic swelling that can happen within the retina. This is crucial because when we see small amounts of swelling, we can go ahead and refer you to a retinal specialist and get it treated while it's still early before we're waiting for the swelling to get worse and waiting till it's more resistant to that treatment. Now, the second thing that you can do for your eyes is stop smoking and avoid tobacco. So listed are some of the conditions that are affected by smoking. So macular degeneration, cataracts, glaucoma, diabetic retinopathy, dry eye syndrome. And the reason smoking causes such an impact to our eyes and our eye health is because smoking definitely increases the amount of oxidative damage that occurs to our body. And the tissue of our eyes is particularly sensitive to that oxidative damage. Patients who have, patients who smoke are 3 to 4 times more likely to develop macular degeneration and vision loss from macular degeneration than patients who aren't. I often have patients who have the genetic markers for macular degeneration or a very strong history of macular degeneration. And they'll often tell me, yes, my mom lost her vision from macular degeneration. But when I look at their maculas, they're either in a very early stage or they don't have much much vision loss, primarily because they're not smokers. They didn't trigger the oxidative damage that causes the vision loss from macular degeneration. And smoking already causes an increase of some of the symptoms from some of our other cardiovascular issues like high blood pressure and diabetic retinopathy. So that can make the presentation of those conditions even worse within the retina as well. Physical exercise is also something that's very important to eye health because physical exercise has actually been shown to make the blood vessels within the eye more resilient to change. So while we can have changes from high blood pressure sometimes and blood sugar, if we incorporate that physical exercise, it can make our blood vessels stronger against that damage. And of course, having regular physical exercises also reduces our incidence of diabetes and high blood pressure and heart disease. But one unique study actually looked at exercise and dry eye and noticed that exercise can even improve dryness because it improves the quality of our tear production. So the next thing that I also like to stress is UV protection. So UV is something that's everywhere, but it can cause the formation of cataracts, ocular cancers. We can even get photokeratitis, which is basically a sunburn on the cornea. And UV can even cause unsightly growths on the surface of our eye known as pterygium and pinguecula, which sometimes we'll see as like pinkish or yellow spots on the eyes. So to prevent UV damage, you want sunglasses that say that they have either 100% UV blocking protection or they have UV 400 protection, which basically covers 99.9% of the damaging UV spectrum. I also encourage wide brimmed hats. Avoiding tanning beds is a big one because tanning can definitely cause patients to be exposed to very direct UV. And, try to avoid going out midday or afternoon because that's when UV tends to be the highest. And those who live in higher altitudes, like those who live in Colorado, tend to get most of the UV damage as well. So, make sure you're also wearing protective eye gear when you are outdoors, like skiing or on the water, because sometimes even the reflection from the water can cause UV damage. And the other thing that we can do to protect our eyes is to basically give it the proper nutrients that it needs. So some of the proper nutrients for our eyes include some of the more important carotenoids known as lutein and zeaxanthin, zinc, vitamins A, C, and E, and omega-3 fatty acids. These are things that we can find in our diet, but are often hard to get all together. So, what I encourage is a very colorful plate. So green leafy vegetables, colorful fruits and vegetables, especially those that are more orange, like carrots, sweet potato, pumpkin, orange colored peppers. Those things have a lot of antioxidants, a lot of those carotenoids that are very protective for the macula. Vegetable oils have a lot of vitamin E that's a very powerful antioxidant. And then wild-caught salmon, tuna, and cold water fish tend to have a lot of omega-3s, which again can fight oxidative damage. So while we do recommend a food-first approach to getting our nutrients, when there's gaps within our diet, supplementation is a great source to fill that gap. So our Cooper vitamins actually have a lot of the carotenoids like lutein and zeaxanthin that can help get those carotenoids for our eye health. And, especially when it's paired with the basic one multivitamin, the eye health vitamin, or even the dermatological health vitamin can provide a lot of those nutrients. So I tell patients who are at risk for macular degeneration, or if they have early macular degeneration, to take the basic one vitamin with the eye health vitamin. But those who maybe, they're not sure if they have macular degeneration in their family, or they're just at higher risk because of how much sun exposure they get. Even taking the dermatological health one will have skin benefits, but still have the lutein and zeaxanthin to provide some protection for the macula as well. The Cooper Complete Advanced Omega-3 is actually really, really good for dry eyes, because I usually recommend at least 1,000 milligrams of omega-3 per day to combat dry eye. And the Cooper Advanced Omega-3 has 1,400 milligrams. And a lot of that is EPA and DHA, which are particularly important to eye health. So, you can always access our website for more tips and eye health advice, but more importantly, come see me. I'd be more than happy to see your eyes and tell you what you need to know. And thank you so much for sticking with me throughout this presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Samin, for a wonderful presentation, first and foremost, and for your dedication to helping us improve our quality and quantity of life. So for the last part of today's presentation, we'd like you to answer some questions from our audience. Essentially, let's start with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. So the general population has substantially increased their exposure to all forms of screen time. Mm-hmm. And our first question comes from our partners at the Vision Impact Institute, and they ask, how do you think the COVID-19 pandemic and the increase in the use of digital devices has affected our vision health?
So very good question, because it is very true that it has impacted the amount of screen time that we're on now. One major impact is I am actually seeing a significant increase in nearsightedness, particularly in children. When we're indoors, or when we were doing a lot of homeschooling, a lot of our material was on a screen, whether it was your teacher on a Zoom call or a PowerPoint to go through. Because we're on that screen, when the eyes have a lot of focusing to do up close, it naturally makes our eyes want to become more nearsighted. And so I've seen that increase in nearsightedness within kids. Also, because when we're stuck on a screen all day for school, we aren't going outside as much either. A lot of people don't realize that, but being stuck indoors on a screen takes away from time that we could be outdoors. And that outdoor exposure, a lot of the research has shown, can be very protective against, developing what we call refractive errors, or even, particularly nearsightedness. So that is one major impact. The other major impact that I see more so in adults is digital eye strain. I know this sounds kind of like a very fluffy term, but this is basically strain that we get from staring at a screen all day long, trying to view a screen that has harsh white light, not taking breaks to look away at more distant targets. So people may experience headaches, brow aches, feeling like they're having to blink a lot, feeling like their vision is getting more blurry in general. And all of that can be a part of digital eye strain. Just a general sense of pressure is something that's a part of digital eye strain as well.
Thanks so much. Along those lines, so do you have any specific tips with respect to taking a digital break?
Yes. So there is something we call the 20-20-20 rule. And what that kind of means in a nutshell is every 20 minutes or so of staring at a computer, take like a 20-second break to look at something far away, preferably 20 feet away or more. So to simplify it even further, every couple minutes, look out a window or something. What that does is it takes our eyes focus from being up close, and it relaxes something known as accommodation, which is what our eyes do to focus up close. And once we relax that accommodation by looking far away, that actually takes down a lot of that strain. So doing that every couple minutes can be very impactful. So for patients who are on a screen a lot or on a computer a lot, I make the recommendation of being by a window or having a window nearby because, you know, it's easy to say take a break, but what do we do as adults? We take a break from our computer to stare at our phones. So kind of defeats the purpose there.
Absolutely true. Thank you for those fantastic tips. And the last question for today, slightly unrelated, but does wearing cheater glasses make your eyes weaker or train your eyes to need them more often? What is your advice there?
So not when wearing the correct strength. So cheaters or over-the-counter readers can definitely be beneficial to the eyes because they help with presbyopia. Now, we still need to wear the correct strength though. So, you know, I know this sounds weird, but we can kind of compare these cheaters to shoes almost. So because patients are always are always asking if, you know, are they becoming more dependent on their cheaters because they find themselves wearing it more? And basically what happens is our eyes feel more comfortable because there's less strain, so we gravitate towards wearing those cheaters. So for example, you know, let's just say you're somebody who's flat-footed and you wear a shoe that's custom made for your flat-footedness. Your feet will generally feel better and you'll want to wear those shoes more often because it's doing the right thing and taking off strain. And it's not actually changing your feet any, but it's taking off that strain, making you able to do the task at hand more easily and with more energy. So getting your eyes examined, getting that prescription tested. Sometimes I'll tell my patients, oh yeah, a 250 is great for you. Or, you know, hey, you're on a computer a lot, a +1 is actually good for you. So when used correctly, they can actually be very beneficial. But that's the key here, when used correctly.
Extremely insightful. Thank you so much, Dr. Samin. So to close today, I invite you to visit cooperinstitute.org to register for upcoming Coffee with Cooper sessions. And thanks everyone. And thank you for joining us today. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.